Welcome to this new automotive news video for Sunday, July 5th, 2026. Today we're going to talk about a new major problem affecting Peugeot, which is forcing the brand to say goodbye to some of its dealerships. Volkswagen, which is about to part ways with one or maybe even several of its brands. And new European regulation on hydrogen cars that could seriously complicate their sale. A European Union country is threatening to close electric car battery factories. I hope today's news will interest you. If that's the case, we count on you to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for future videos, boosting this one if you're watching at home, and of course, as usual, leaving a comment to share your thoughts on today's news. Long considered the most powerful car manufacturer in Europe, the Volkswagen Group may be forced to make some particularly difficult decisions. According to the Financial Times, the group's financial advisors are recommending selling several assets, several of its brands, if you prefer, in order to finance a large restructuring plan. You may already know this, but Volkswagen had a very bad year in 2025 with profits that were almost cut in half, reaching only, quote-unquote, 7 billion euros. Volkswagen lost about 20% of its stock market value in 1 year, which is huge. They are about to lay off 100,000 people. They're cutting the fat, meaning they're getting rid of everything that isn't absolutely essential to them, and they're sorting out what makes them money and what doesn't make them enough money. So Volkswagen is basically scraping the bottom of the barrel to find money, actually to get back on track. And one of the quickest ways to quickly get some cash is to sell off its less interesting brands. There are two brands that are particularly affected. The first one is Lamborghini. Not that Lamborghini is a brand that doesn't make money, actually. It's a brand that's doing pretty well, given the current situation. Except that the group's financial advisors want to separate Lamborghini, at least partially, from the rest of the group. Basically, to list Lamborghini on the stock market under its own name. This would let the public finance part of the brand, allowing Volkswagen to recover several billion euros at once. And so they could still keep part of the control by buying back some of these future shares. Through the Audi brand, which also belongs to Volkswagen and absolutely needs Lamborghini, especially for its high-end models. For example, the new Audi Nouveau La R is essentially a restyled Lamborghini Temerario. There's also a rumor that Volkswagen may partially or fully sell Lamborghini, and it hasn't been denied, since one of its spokespersons simply explained that all the brands and subsidiaries of the group are currently being reviewed for a potential deep transformation, as part of what he called a realignment of the company. The second brand involved is Ducati, a brand that has also belonged to the Volkswagen Group since 2012 through Audi. It's not a big surprise, though it's a legendary brand. Volkswagen has been trying to sell it for some time. They had already seriously considered this possibility in 2017, in a context that was still much more favorable to the Volkswagen Group. Except at the time, the IG Metalworkers Union, the German unions, opposed it because it's a brand that's doing well and because it's a profitable brand. It could also be a good opportunity for Volkswagen to bring in several billion euros at once to finance Volkswagen's transition, which wants to refocus on its core business, namely, well, selling really boring cars. By the way, speaking of really boring cars, let's talk about Peugeot. We know that Peugeot is struggling in France. We know that overall the Stellantis group and Peugeot are struggling internationally, especially in Europe, but also elsewhere in the world. Previously, these issues mainly showed in sales figures, but now customers, especially in distant markets like Australia, are noticing them too. In Australia, Peugeot's longtime distributor, Inscape, has simply decided to drop the brand after several years of continuous sales decline. This decision will lead to the gradual closure of a large number of Peugeot dealerships in the country. This is a real blow for Stellantis, which, remember, just a few months ago announced that Peugeot would be one of the group's 4 priority brands, alongside Jeep, Ram, and Fiat. As such, it will benefit from significant investments to accelerate its development outside Europe, especially because Stellantis is likely sensing the changing tides and is well aware that a brand like Peugeot is highly dependent on Europe. In fact, 75% of Peugeot's sales are in Europe, but the European market is basically dying, to put it simply. So they want to reduce their dependence on Europe and grow elsewhere. And with what's happening in Australia, things aren't looking good. In the first 5 months of 2026, Peugeot sold only 323 vehicles in Australia. You might think it's because nobody cares about Peugeot in Australia, but that wasn't entirely the case a few years ago. In 2026 so far, sales have dropped by 35 compared to the same period in 2025. And most importantly, just a few years ago, Peugeot accounted for almost 10,000 annual sales over there. Even more worrying, 40 of those Australian sales come from a single model, the partner van. Overall, private customers hardly buy any Peugeot cars anymore, even though the lineup over there is still pretty broad, 2008, 3008, 5008, 308, 408, Everything is there with pure tech engines. By the way, maybe that's why they're not selling much, because that's the only mild hybrid engine offered to private customers. Faced with this situation, Inske hasn't decided to throw in the towel. That same distributor had already made a similar decision with Citroën in 2024, where today the brand simply no longer exists in Australia. That's still a strong signal, because when dealerships leave a brand and the network weakens, the crisis becomes obvious to customers, not just about financial results. While manufacturers are already trying to keep their heads above water, the European Commission is preparing a new measure that is likely to cause controversy. While several manufacturers continue to bet on hydrogen, especially BMW, which has just unveiled its iX5 with new hydrogen technology, a new regulation could make these vehicles much harder to sell and resell. The text in question is not new. It's Regulation No. 134 of the Economic Commission for Europe, which was published in 2019 and is dedicated to the approval of hydrogen vehicles, and it's currently being tightened and revised. Its goal is to strengthen safety, especially for the tanks that store hydrogen under very high pressure. However, the regulation is changing, and now the Commission wants to require that all new compressed hydrogen storage systems operating at a nominal service pressure of 70 megapascals or less cannot exceed a lifespan of 15 years. The text even specifies that the retirement date cannot be set more than 15 years after the tank's manufacturing date. So, what does all this actually mean? It means that hydrogen car owners might be forced to replace their tank after 15 years. And this is one of the most expensive components of a hydrogen car, along with the fuel cell. Let me tell you, knowing in advance that you'll have to plan for several thousand or even tens of thousands of euros in repairs every 15 years on your hydrogen car is likely to put off quite a few people. It'll either be that or accepting to sell them at a huge loss on the used car market, but hydrogen cars already have a hard time reselling. A Mirai hydrogen car sold new for 70,000 euros is worth about 15,000 euros on the used market with only 70,000 miles on it. We've finally found a car that accelerates faster than an electric car, though that's probably not great for the owner. It's unlucky, and the tank isn't the only problem. The only part affected is that the first generations of fuel cells also have a limited lifespan. And this fuel cell is truly the heart of the vehicle. Made from composite materials, especially carbon, it contains a small amount of platinum. Replacing it also comes at a very high cost. Fortunately, modern hydrogen car manufacturers have already worked on new fuel cell systems that don't have this problem. Still, it's another tough blow. While many manufacturers are still investing in hydrogen, this regulation raises a question. Is Europe at risk of making this technology even harder to adopt before it even finds its audience? But in the European Union, the difficulties don't stop at hydrogen. Now, a European country is directly threatening to close its electric car battery factories. That's really unlucky because the European Union has been trying for several years to reduce its dependence on China by developing its own battery factories. But that was without taking Hungary into account. Until now, Hungary was one of the symbols of this strategy for transitioning the automotive industry. Between 2021 and 2026, the previous government attracted nearly 26 billion euros in foreign investments in the battery sector, mainly from Chinese and South Korean groups, turning the country into one of the main European hubs for battery production. Except now the tone has completely changed. You may know this, but the government has just changed in Hungary, a new government that had been praised by most other European governments, who thought the new one would be more inclined to accelerate on certain issues, especially the transition to electric. Well, things are not going as planned at all since this new government is threatening to shut down its electric car battery factories. They believe that in recent years, industrial development has come at the expense of environmental protection, and that the battery industry would actually be one of the most polluting industries, especially when it comes to water pollution. That's exactly where this whole story started. There have been several measures, several tests carried out near these factories, and apparently the water is of particularly concerning quality. What we want to do now in Hungary is to give licenses to certain companies that have proven they produce electric car batteries while respecting environmental standards. For the others, it will be closure. And these are not just empty words, because at the end of June 2026, the authorities already suspended the production license of a company called Semcor after detecting significant aluminum water pollution in its samples. Semcor, which mainly produces separators for lithium-ion batteries, explained that it has launched an internal investigation to determine the source of this pollution and to try to reverse the trend. Apart from the oxidation that is striking, Europe is investing tens of billions of euros to build a battery industry that can compete with China. And countries that are now considering closing those same factories, using their best trap cards, their best counters, or are the one about complying with the new environmental requirements, which are set by the European Commission, by the way. A situation that really shows just how much the transition to electric vehicles is becoming a rather unique balancing act between industrial ambition, environmental accessibility, and the purchasing power of European citizens. There you go, we've covered all the news for this Sunday and for this week as well. We'll see each other again tomorrow for a new week of automotive news. In the meantime, feel free to leave a like on this video, subscribe for the next ones, and maybe even support us by clicking the join button below this video. We'll see each other tomorrow for another week of news. Ciao.